I'm very pleased to introduce Tomas Pimenta, who's going to be giving us a talk called Apocalypticism and Conspiracy Theories. Please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I really thank you for the organization of this very interesting conference, and I'm very glad to be here. So the topic of this conference is, of this presentation is a little bit weird, like apocalypticism and conspiracy theories. So I think that before I start, I should say something about why. Why did I decide to write about this? I'm currently writing a dissertation on conspiracy theories, and this is going to be like one of the last chapters of my dissertation. This has been motivated by the fact that I've realized that many conspiracy theories, they reproduce and they reiterate some scatological or apocalyptic motives. And unfortunately, some of these conspiracy theories, they have been extremely relevant in politics in certain specific occasions. And I think that right now we are living in times where such conspiracy theories, they have some kind of relevance. And of course, the most known example is of course QAnon, but also like in Brazil and some, even in Europe, you can see variations of this. So my guiding questions are like, is the role of apocalyptic conspiracy theories, that I'm calling here ACTs, in these ideological movements contingent or necessary? What can we learn about politics by studying conspiracy theories, and specifically apocalyptic conspiracy theories? And what can we learn about conspiracy theories if we consider their political implications? So what I'm trying to do here is a double movement, from politics towards the philosophy of conspiracy theories, and from the philosophy of conspiracy theories to political theory or political philosophy. So Hofstadter, he in his very famous piece on the paranoid style, he suggests that there is an intimate relationship between conspiracy theories and apocalypticism. So he says that the paranoid spokesman sees the fate of conspiracy in apocalyptic terms. He traces in the birth and death of whole worlds, whole political orders, whole systems of human values. He's always manning the barricades of civilization. He constantly lives at a turning point. Like religious millennialists, he expresses the anxiety of those who are living through the last days, and he's sometimes disposed to set a date for the apocalypse. Of course, this does not represent all conspiracy theories. What Hofstadter is stating here, I take to be a claim about one very specific set of conspiracy theories, and I'm totally aware of this, and I will get to this later. So the structure of my presentation is going to be, in the first part, I will present to you, like, that's something that is completely in progress, but I'm attempting to formulate a kind of typology of conspiracy theories. And I'd really like to hear what you have to say about it. And in the second part, I'm going to, based on this typology, prove why these apocalyptic conspiracy theories, they fit very specific political role. Okay, so let's move on to the first part. So I will begin just saying brief words about the main debate in the literature between like particularism and generalism. So what I take to be true about particularism is that I agree that we cannot derive like general properties or make universal judgments about conspiracy theories as such. That I take to be an impossible task, and completely, it doesn't, yeah, I would say like that this research agenda is unfruitful. But I also see that there are important limits to particularism. And namely, and here I'm very influenced by Stokes' criticism of pure particularism, because for particularism, we cannot talk about conspiracy theories as such. We can only think about theories in general, and some of which they have a conspiracy as a main explanatory cause, right? So the question remains, so what do conspiracy theories designate, right? So what were we talking about when we talk about conspiracy theories? Is the whole conversation about conspiracy theories a big misunderstanding, because we are talking about something that in the end does not designate anything? So I'm afraid that the whole philosophy of conspiracy theories, they end up becoming just a critique of unjustified uses of the term conspiracy theory. And we don't get into an analysis of why this term has become so important, what is involved when we use it, and other questions that I take to be relevant. So, as you probably all know, like Stokes criticized pure particularism, and I take that his criticism can be understood as a more general criticism of epistemological approaches to conspiracy theories in general, because we cannot consider conspiracy theories only through an epistemological point of view. Although this is very important, and I think that we have learned a lot with the development of the particularist position, I think that we really need to step forward and begin other kinds of reflections about it. So conspiracy theories, they are not only a kind of explanation, they are a social practice. And this is also very abstract and very indeterminate, because there are many ways we can consider conspiracy theories as a social practice. On the one hand, as a practice of construing and believing in such conspiracies, but also the practice, as it has been often mentioned, of using the term conspiracy theories as a way of excluding certain kinds of explanations from consideration. So all of these aspects are contained in what I'm calling here a social practice. So Stokes, he says in his paper that has been published in Dentit's collection, he says, but there is also a corresponding risk of severing conspiracy theories from the social context in which they arise, as well as focusing on conspiracy theory as a propositional entity rather than conspiracy theorizing as an action. And as I have just mentioned before, I believe that it's more than just conspiracy theorizing. There is more involved in this action that we relate to conspiracy theories. So he continues, conspiracy theories, as the term is popularly used at least, do not simply appear on paper and in the abstract. They are constructed by real people and consist of speech acts that accuse other real or allegedly real people of doing secret and typically immoral things. That locutionary function of conspiracy theories is thus unavoidably social, and their utterance, qua speech acts, is thereby subject to ethical evaluation. So what I'm trying to do here is to deepen the analysis towards this direction that Stokes pointed to. And in order to do so, and I'm attempting to kind of, I have named it here a typology. I don't know if this word is appropriate, but let's just call it like this for the time being. I think that there are two aspects of conspiracy theories that we can pay attention to, that I think that they help us to understand what we are talking about. So first, we can consider them from a formal point of view. So how are conspiracy theories produced? How do they circulate? With which purposes are they formulated? Those are formal aspects of conspiracy theorizing that can reveal some important aspects of it. On the other hand, we can think about their content. So what is the conspiracy theory about, right? What is its object? What conception of knowledge does it entertain? How much room for reflexivity or fallibilism does it allow? What kind of politics does it entail? And I would also add another one that I forgot to write here, which is what kind of social causality does it presupposes? Okay, so the term, thinking from the point of view of the form, which I'm not going to discuss much here, but I think that it's very important to consider. The term conspiracy theory can designate a multiplicity of things, right? So there are many entities in the world that we can call or that have been called by someone in a certain context a conspiracy theory. And they can be radically different things. That's why this concept is so complicated. So many times what we call conspiracy theory is a piece of investigative journalism. And those are usually the cases that we take to be the good conspiracy theories, because they are the result of a research of someone who interviewed a lot of people who researched the sources and that they investigated in archives and that they write a text with a lot of evidence and so on. It can also be sometimes a piece of academic research that can be called also a conspiracy theory. It can be something like a rumor or an urban legend, or sometimes a forum post on the internet, or an internet meme, or it can be also a piece of propaganda. So something that is designed by professionals, that they know very well how the human mind works and how people are affected by political propaganda, and they design very specific pieces with certain political purposes, right? So all of this can come under the same name, conspiracy theory. And I think that we should always establish these differentiations when we talk about and I know that although particularism is not incompatible with these concerns, I think that it often, and here especially the epistemological literature, it disregards these kinds of differentiations when usually we call all of them a theory, for example, or yeah. So the other aspects that I would like to consider here relates to the content of the conspiracy theories. So I have listed some examples, which I take to be paradigmatic of certain kinds of conspiracy theories. All of them we can, in a certain way, call a conspiracy theory. And then I would like to, from the content of them, extract some properties that I think it's going to help us to typify or typify and characterize conspiracy theories. So the first one, let's take like very known examples. Elvis is alive or Paul is dead. The second one, it relates to the Iraq invasion. And I think that this example has been often discussed. The third one regards the HIV and the conspiracy theories that claim that it was artificially invented to pursue genocidal racist purposes. Example number 4, world politics is ruled by Jewish bankers, for example. A typical a conspiracy theory of the late 19th century and first half of the 20th century in Europe. Number 5, US politics is ruled by a sect of atheists and pedophile politicians, bankers, and artists who sacrifice children in satanic rituals. Number 6, I live in a Truman Show, which is also a variation of a conspiracy theory. 7, we live in the Matrix. And 8, it's a kind of a Cartesian exercise. The whole world is a fiction created by an evil demon, right? A kind of Gnostic doubt, skepticism. So I try to analyze some elements of these conspiracy theories. And so, for example, regarding the first one about Elvis and Paul, the object is an individual's whereabouts, is an event, it's a singular fact. So the degree of skepticism, and here I'm thinking a lot of Brian Keeley's seminal piece on conspiracy theories, in which Keeley argues that conspiracy theories usually require an increasing amount of skepticism. I think that this requires a lot more nuance, because different kinds of conspiracy theories, they require different degrees of skepticism. Different kinds of conspiracy theories require different degrees of skepticism. That's what I want to say. So the first example, I believe that it requires a small degree. And there is a high degree of reflexivity, of fallibility, which means the possibility of being wrong, right? We can believe that someone somehow believes that Elvis is still alive, that he traveled to a different country and he lived. I mean, not now, because that would be probably, he would be more than 100 years, I don't know. But, and this kind of example is indifferent in terms of politics. Let's consider, for example, now the Iraq War. We are thinking about a geopolitical event. Also, it's one single event, one war, and it also requires a small degree of skepticism. You can still believe in most of institutions in the world, most of social practices, and still hold to this conspiracy theory. It requires a high degree. It allows a high degree of reflexivity. And the kind of politics that it entails is a certain demand for responsibilization or legal reparation, something like this. In the case of HIV, it also concerns one single event. There is more skepticism involved. There is a lower degree of reflexivity, but the kind of politics is kind of similar, demand for responsibilization and legal reparation. But now let's consider examples 4 and 5, which fall under the category of apocalyptic conspiracy theories that I'm trying to deal right now. They concern not an event. They are not talking about one single event, for example, the life of one individual, one disease, or one war. They are trying to explain our social world as a whole, all the process that involve it, right? The economics, culture, religion, and so on. Sexuality, consciousness, education, everything can be explained. So they require a huge degree of skepticism, right? So in the case of anti-Semitism, you can still believe in national ties. So you can identify yourself with your fellow nationals, different from the others, from other religion, right? There is almost no degree of reflexivity, which means that every piece of evidence against it becomes a piece of evidence for it, right? So what Keeley discusses in his paper. And the kind of politics that it involves is a politics of elimination or a politics of purification, in the sense that this group of conspirators, they have deviated our whole social world towards a different direction. And the only solution is to eliminate this group, to purify society from this group of conspirators. And I think that the QAnon, some versions of anti-communism, they all share this traits. And then examples 6, 7, and 8, I'm not going to discuss them much here, but the Truman Show, it concerns an individual's world, right? You require absolute skepticism because there is also no space for even family ties. So all your relations, they are suspicious now. And the political outcome is helplessness. And in the examples of Matrix and Evil Demon, the evil demon, you cannot even trust your interiority, your sense perception. There is no sense certainty. Everything is put into question. So I believe that this brings you to an absolute alienation if you remain in this position. Because even your thoughts, they can be either programmed by a machine or they can be already an invention by this evil genius, let's say. So there is no room even for your interiority, your subjectivity, your reasoning. So why do we care about these apocalyptic conspiracy theories? The examples 4 and 5 that I mentioned. They can be the least interesting from an epistemological point of view, precisely because they require a huge degree of skepticism. They cannot be ever wrong, right? They require an absolute dogmatism and so on. But they can be extremely relevant in politics. They can mobilize a lot of people to act in certain ways. And even if people do not actually believe in them, they can act as if they believed in them. And that's why they are so dangerous. So following Hofstadter, he says something very interesting in his piece about the paranoid style. He says that there is a way we can learn about political psychology through our political rhetoric. And I think that that's one of the moves that I'm trying to do here, right? To kind of gain insight into our political situation through an analysis of these specific kinds of conspiracy theories. And then now I'm going to try to be brief here because that's it's going to deviate a little bit from the topic of conspiracy theories, but I try to give an account of what it means apocalypticism in politics. So because of the recent events in politics, there has been an increasing body of literature on the ideology of the new right and on apocalypticism and so on. And here I follow a lot Mark Lilla, who is a professor of political theory at Columbia University, who has published a series of very interesting books on this topic. So basically what he argues is that in modern politics, we can divide politics in two main axes. One that goes from liberal to conservative. So people can be either more liberal, either more conservative. And that concerns a difference about what we conceive of being the human nature. And there is also another axis that goes from revolutionary to reactionary, and which is not a divergence about human nature, but rather a divergence about the meaning of history. How do we understand historical process and so on? So in order to understand this, there is one historian or philosopher of history that is very important for me. It's called Heinrich Koselleck. So basically he says that in modernity, we have a new conception of time. And basically what he's saying is that previously our current experience of reality, what he calls our space of experience, corresponded to our horizon of expectations. What happens in modernity is that our horizons of expectations, they become always different from our experience. So we always expect, basically what he's saying is that we expect a different future from what we have right now. And this difference from what we are right now, from what we expect to be, is what allows the development of a series of progressive political ideologies. And progressive here is a very technical term in the sense that they believe that history evolves, that there is a process of historical learning, and that our future is going to be different and often better than our present. And many ideologies, they fall under this category. There is an idea of historical learning, of history is moralized, and so on. But, and this is a big but, and that's going back to Mark Lila's theory about the difference between revolutionary and reactionary. Not everyone thought about history in this way. So in the same way that you have the emergence of progressive ideologies, you have many narratives that claim that modernity is a history of decay, that society is in a process of degradation, and this degradation is concerns our morality, our customs, our education, our ways of life, and religion, and so on. So everything that is related to modernity, secularism, progress is identified to them as a process of degeneration, degradation of humanity, right? And these kinds of narratives, they can be found in numerous authors and philosophers. I recommend Mark Lila's book called The Shipwrecked Mind, in which he analyzes many of these kinds of narratives. And I believe that the apocalyptic conspiracy theories, they spring from these narratives of ruin. That's why I did this whole deviation, just to understand from where they come from. And actually, most of them, they have a very precise origin that some of you for sure know. So all of these conspiracy theories about the Masons and Illuminati, they have a very specific origin. They come from a way in which some Christians, monarchists interpreted the French Revolution. So here there are two main books, one by John Robison and one by the French Augustin Baruel. The two, they are very interesting because they are accounts of the French Revolution that deviate completely from what we usually learn about the French Revolution as like a history of progress and advancement, the end of absolute monarchy, and so on. So usually we understand it as a moment of freedom, increasing freedom, and they did it in a radically different way. But what is more important is that they could not formulate this narrative of decay without a certain conspiracy theory. Because, and that's my interpretation, the revolution was so horrible, so radical, so violent, that it could not be explained through worldly political forces. It had to be projected into an almost supernatural force, a political force that it's, let's call it, outside history. And that's the role of the group of conspirators there. So the Illuminati, the Masons, they are always somehow outside history. They are never really normal actors in our regular affairs, right? And I believe that here we have the birth of a certain model that is going to be reiterated in different moments. So the Protocols of the Elders of the Zion, which is like the most important anti-Semitic document, it's a kind of variation of this. And of course, this is going to get poorer and poorer in terms of content, but also QAnon's conspiracy theories, they reproduce the same patterns, right? With less content, less kind of complexity, let's say it. And so, for example, here there is one historian called Moshe Postone. When he's talking about anti-Semitism, he says, for example, that the power attributed to the Jews was mysteriously intangible, abstract, and universal. It is as if it stands behind phenomena. So this, when we read about anti-Semitism and about these conspiracy theories, that's something that comes often, right? So Hofstadter says similarly that, quotation, unlike the rest of us, the enemy is not caught into the toils of the vast mechanism of history. He wills, indeed, he manufactures the mechanism of history or tries to deflect the normal course of history in an evil way. And what I try to extract from it is that the only kind of politics that corresponds to these conspiracy theories is a kind of politics of elimination, or a politics of purification, in the sense that as these groups of conspirators, they deviate the normal course of our history, the only solution for us is to eliminate these groups, to purify society from this. And that's what I take to be very dangerous about these kinds of conspiracy theories. And that's why I believe that Stokes' concern about pure particularism that loses sight of this specific historical and political aspects is an important point to be made. So I'm going to just accelerate here because I know that my time is running out. Yeah, so basically what my conclusions is that the conspiracy theories, they perform a fundamental role in these reactionary ideologies. This is not superficial. That's not contingent, that's necessary, because it allows them to single out a specific group that is the cause of all problems and degradation of society. These groups are represented as having supernatural powers, and there is no tolerance and compromise. The test of politics is only to eliminate them and purify it. And to conclude, so I believe that the emphasis on the political role of conspiracy theories is something that we should consider. I still have 7 minutes, right?
Yes, although you'll want some time for questions and answers.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I can conclude here. And I would be happy to hear your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, for a very interesting talk. Whilst we wait for questions to come up in the Q&A, actually, we've got our first question from Curtis. Do you think that Kassam's idea that conspiracy theories function to serve an anti-Semitic racist agenda might apply to apocalyptic conspiracy theories, but not conspiracy theories more generally?
I do agree with this. I think that conspiracy theories in general, they do not support an anti-Semitic or racist agenda. And as I said, when I try to offer this typology of the forms of conspiracy theories, I think that it's very important for us to differentiate, because as I said, pieces of academic research, pieces of investigative journalism, they can all be labeled conspiracy theories. So it doesn't make sense to say that all of them, they serve an anti-Semitic and racist agenda. I believe that we should, I think that what I've tried to do is to select a small group of conspiracy theories, which I'm calling here the ACTs, and I believe that they kind of reproduce this, which did not begin as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that has become so. It began as a conspiracy theory about the Illuminati, which means what we call today the enlightened people. So basically, they were secular and anti-monarchical republicans, everything that nowadays would take to be our basic values of like Western societies, let's say like this.
Excellent. So I'm actually always quite interested in people who go back to Stokes, because I do feel, even though Lee Basham, Charles Pigden, and myself criticize Stokes' reluctant particularism or defeasible generalism, that there is still something about the social practice of conspiracy theory as a kind of narrative form that we do need to be aware of and be cognizant of. One thing which might be interesting for you to look at is some of the conspiracy narrative material in ancient Athens and ancient Rome. So there's a book by Victoria Emma Pagan, I think she's actually got 2 books on conspiracy narratives in ancient Rome, where she talks about the functional role that stories of conspiracy played in Roman society, which was often a case of taking the blame away from good, virtuous Roman men and blaming instead women, slaves, or foreigners as being the reason why there's rot in the Republic. So it might be interesting to actually look at that particular kind of thing, which predates the French Revolution and has some really interesting stuff about narrative forms. We have a question from Marius. Do you see a difference between official/orthodox apocalyptic narratives, e.g. by the Catholic Church, and the ones by QAnon and the like?
Yes, I think that there is a strong difference, and here I couldn't develop this much, but I just mentioned it very briefly. And I think that what is very important here is the discussion about history, and that's why I brought Heinrad Koselleck, because there is a way in which how the apocalyptic narratives before the advent of modernity functioned and apocalyptic narratives after the advent of modernity. And I think that this is extremely important. And I'd like to thank also Dentit for the suggestions. I've taken note of this. I think that that would be very interesting because yeah, I think that we do need to make these differentiations, right? And that's why I think that a theory of history here helps, because the role of conspiracy theories, they can change historically as well.
Our final question comes from Daniel. Thank you for the interesting talk. There seems to be a tension. The conspirators have supernatural power on the one hand, and on the other hand, they have to be eliminated. Is this a real tension? And would you say that apocalyptic conspiracy theories are intrinsically contradictory?
I do think so, because they always work as a projection of, so for example, if you think about in the case of Germany in the 20s, you had a lot of economic, social problems, and then you project all social problems as like a kind of social progress in one single group. So of course, this projection of a supernatural power is something that is completely, it's a fantasy, right? At the same time, those are real people, as Stokes says. They are people here and now. So you have this tension. You project in a group the cause of all social problems, but at the same time, it's a group that is people like us. So there is this inherent tension. I think that you are very right to point out to this.